Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Okay, Erev Tov, everyone. Happy everyone can make it, even though the time for Mincha is early. We're going to introduce now in Hilchot Lashon Hara a concept that is often misinterpreted, and that is the concept called Apei Telata. The Gemara tells us that any matter that is stated Be'apei Telata, which means in the presence of three listeners. Apei means face, and Telata is three in Aramaic, is not subject to the prohibition of Lashon Hara. That's what the Gemara tells us. So I'm going to read for you the introduction that he gives on this here below, and the misinterpretations, and 5 explanations by our Rishonim what exactly Apei Telata constitutes. So he writes the following: this ruling is commonly misinterpreted as either A, permitting one to speak Lashon Hara to 3 listeners, or B, broadly permitting one to repeat Lashon Hara that was already said in the presence of 3 listeners. To correct these misinterpretations, the Hafetz Chaim clarifies the 5 opinions of the Rishonim as to the actual meaning of this statement. So the notes here provide an actual summary of each of the Rishonim. The first one is Tosafot. Tosafot says as following: Reuven may make a statement about Shimon that allows for 2 interpretations, one derogatory, one not derogatory, if he does so in the presence of 3 listeners. Since Reuven realizes that his public statement may eventually be repeated to Shimon, he will be careful to express himself in a manner that would not convey a derogatory message about Shimon. That's actually the halakha that we're going to get to today after this introduction. The Rambam writes that Apei Telata means if Reuven said Lashon Hara about Shimon in the presence of 3 listeners, it is permitted for the listeners to repeat the Lashon Hara. Once 3 people heard the derogatory statement, it is now called public knowledge, and it can be repeated. That's the Rambam's interpretation. Rashi says, if in the presence of 3 listeners, Reuven shares information about his business that would ordinarily be considered personal, it is permitted for the listeners to repeat this information. Reuven's willingness to speak in the presence of 3 people proves that he does not mind if it is publicized. That's Rashi. The Rashbam, who was Rashi's grandson, he writes, if Reuven spoke negatively about Shimon in the presence of 3 listeners, it is not considered slander for one of the listeners to inform Shimon that Reuven slandered him. The rationale for this is that there is an assumption that any statement made in the presence of 3 listeners inevitably spreads around. Thus, we may assume that Shimon would have eventually heard about Reuven's slander in any case. That's the Rashbam. And lastly, Rabbeinu Yonah, if Reuven must speak negatively about Shimon so people will not learn from his bad ways, he should do so in front of 3 people to demonstrate that his intent is indeed for constructive purposes. Otherwise, a listener might think that Reuven's intent is merely to disparage Shimon. Okay, so those are 5 different interpretations of what Apei Telata is in front of 3. With that, he is going to tell us our next halakha, and he begins by presenting Tosafot's explanation that the license only applies. When I say license, means that you are allowed to say the Lashon Hara only when someone made an ambiguous statement that could be interpreted either derogatory or non-derogatory. As to the license that the rabbi said, Lomar bifnei shlosha, for Reuven to speak about Shimon in front of 3 listeners. Hainu bedavar she'eno gnai gamur. This applies only to a statement that is not clearly derogatory. V'adibur shelo yesh lo shne panim. And these words are ambiguous, and it has 2 possible interpretations, one negative, one positive. And he's going to give an example later. Ve'inyan kazeh yadua, shetalui lefi adibur sheomer oto hamsaper be'et sipuro. It is known that the implication of these statements depends on how the speaker expresses himself when relating the story. Bazehi tiru chazal lomar bifnei shlosha. The rabbis permitted this type of statement to be made in the presence of 3 listeners. Vetaluhu, and they based this on the following assumption. Kevan she'omer hadvarim bifnei shlosha, since Reuven relates the matter in front of 3 people, yodea bevadai sheyavo hadevarim leoznav. He certainly realizes that this matter will eventually get to Shimon. De chavrach chavra itle. Why? Because it's a statement, your friend has a friend. Obviously, things just pass from one person to the next until it gets to Shimon. Ve'alken hu shomer et atzmo be'et amira. So Reuven, knowing that he's talking to 3 people, and knowing that this will probably get to Shimon, okay, he's going to guard himself when speaking about Shimon in the presence of these people. Lomar be'ofen shelo yeh minkar mileshono leshon gnai. To express in a way that's not going to convey a derogatory message about Shimon. Unetzayer davar echad. We will illustrate one case. Umizen nakish lechol kayotze bazeh, and we can apply this license to all similar cases. Kegon sheshoalin lo, someone asked Reuven, Aye nimsa esh, where can I find fire? Okay, this was in reference, you need a fire for an oven to bake food. So I need fire. Who has an oven lit? Where can I find fire? Where can a kindled stove be found? Vehu meshiv, Reuven responds, Sham timsa, you can find over there in Shimon's home, shemevashlin tamid basar vedagim, because they are constantly cooking meat and fish over there. Now, the davar ze talui lefi amirato bishat maaseh. These words, the insinuation of Reuven's response, depends on how he expresses himself when making the statement. Imrotze, if he wants, motzi ze belashon she'en bo gnai lachavero. He can express it in a way that is not derogatory and do not reflect negatively on Shimon. De be'emet lifamim en bo avla, because in truth there is nothing wrong with always having food cooking on your stove. Kegon sheyesh lo bnei bait harbe. Such in the case, maybe Shimon has a very big family, okay, and they're always making a lot of food. Va'azaro hakadosh baruch hu sheyesh lo hon rav, and Hashem blessed him with great wealth. And Hara, there's a lot of food, a lot of kids eating, and there's a lot of food in the oven. Or maybe Shimon runs a guest house, and again, there's people coming in and out. And therefore, when Reuven asks, where can I find fire? Or Reuven is asked, where can I find fire? And he responds, Lo timsa ata esh ki im bebet ploni. The only place you're going to find is in Shimon's house. Shemevashlin tamid, because over there they're always cooking. So Reuven's words are not Lashon Hara in that situation. Bekavanato kaniska le'el, because he said it in a way that we mentioned above, that Shimon has many house members or many guests coming through. V'chol ki hai gavna b'inyane avak Lashon Hara. Okay, and all such cases involving avak Lashon Hara is again, it's not Lashon Hara, we call it the dust of Lashon Hara. Talui be'ofen amirat ha'mesaper be'et diburo. It depends on how the speaker expresses himself when he speaks. Okay, so again, if he expresses in a manner that Shimon always has fire because he has guests, okay, that statement is permitted. Avat, im motzioto bekolo bitnuotav deminkar shekavanato shehu marbe bisudat mera'u tamid. If Reuven expresses with the response with a tone or a body language, includes the body language, that Shimon likes to have social parties. Okay? That guy Shimon, that guy's having parties all the time. There's always, people, I hear music all the time. Oh, I can't imagine what's going on over there. Even though saying that he has constant parties is not a completely derogatory statement. Okay, it's not a sin to have parties. Okay, might be a waste of time, but it's not so much not a sin, outright sin to have parties. Afilu hachi kerau chazal avak lashon hara. This is when the Chachamim called this Avak Lashon Hara, ve'asur lomar afilu bifnei shlosha. And it's forbidden to make such a statement even in the presence of three, because the body language and the tone of the voice that he was using suggests that it was meant to be derogatory, and the fact that he mentioned it in front of three people, that does not give you grounds to permit it in order to repeat it. So if he said it in a way, Shimon has fire, right? He's got a lot of gas over there, and he said that in front of three people, and the way he said it presents that in a positive light, Beseder, a person who listens to that can now go and repeat to somebody else, I know Shimon has a lot of guests, he has a fire in his home, he cooks a lot of food, and that's not Lashon Hara. But again, in the other way, giving the negative connotation, when a person uses his body language, the tone of his voice, and for sure that guy, whatever, parties and all that, that's when it becomes a problem, and the listener cannot repeat it, and is not allowed to go and repeat it to others. We'll continue Bezat Hashem on this concept tomorrow.